Good morning, everyone. Hi. Hello. Really excited to welcome you to the final day of the GHSA Annual Meeting. This is going to be a great session. It's a little bit like the warm-up act to Jim Kelly, who's going to be our closing luncheon speaker today, and we're looking forward to that as well. All right, I've got a couple questions. Did you have fun last night at Punch Bowl Social? Yeah. It's a great event. I love seeing people outside and just having conversations, sharing best practices, networking. That's how we're going to get traffic deaths under control. We're not going to do it solely over Zoom meetings. So I love seeing people together safely sharing ideas and some best practices. It was a lot of fun. A big thank you to Uber for sponsoring last night's event. GHSA is really excited about our partnership with Uber. We're going to be launching some new grants around the holidays to make sure that when people are out celebrating, they're able to do it safely. And we also have a couple of other new initiatives with Uber that we'll be announcing soon. So keep watching, as they say. We've had a great turnout, not only at this conference, but online. We have webcast our major general sessions, including this one, and it's been interesting. Each one has been growing in number. Our Director of Communications, Adam Snyder, sent me a note about a half an hour ago. Hey, this is the biggest registration we've had yet. I think he was trying to make me nervous, but it's exciting to see people watching this online as well. So if you're online watching us, use hashtag GHSA2021 and let us know your ideas and your thoughts. We had a great session yesterday on equity with Chief Best. She made a couple comments during her general presentation about aging and how challenging that is, and some jokes about it. When I was talking to her when she got ready to leave, I said, I think I'm handling aging pretty well, with the exception, I hate my reading glasses and I hate how I look. I said, Chief Best, I'm really kind of vain about it, to be honest. And she said, you be vain, it's okay. So I am now newly empowered in my vanity, so I'm not wearing my reading glasses this morning, so please be patient with me. We're going to be talking today about a theme that's come out throughout the conference, the deadly and persistent problem of speeding. It's not a new problem, but we've obviously become much more aware of it during the pandemic. We heard it in the general session Monday with the chair of NTSB. We heard it yesterday around equity. It's a difficult problem. GHSA first sounded the alarm about the dangerous uptick with speeding early in the pandemic. We've been calling attention at the same time to this behavior for years. Over the last decade or so, it's been frustrating dealing with our federal partners on the Hill and then the federal agencies. They have said, speeding is really a state problem. You all deal with it. I think that's starting to change. We're seeing a lot of interest in Washington, D.C. to address speeding, so that's encouraging news. Before the pandemic, GHSA announced a partnership with the National Road Safety Foundation and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety to pilot some innovative approaches to speeding. We asked the states to apply and then have awarded grant money to the states of Virginia and Maryland. So there's a lot going on with speeding. Hopefully you saw within the last year, we partnered with our friends at Ford Motor Company Fund. We put out a report about teens and speeding and the impact that speeding continues to have on our teen drivers. We also have awarded grants to multiple states to address speeding amongst teens, and that's also in partnership with our friends at Ford Fund. So there's a lot going on in this area. We heard from NHTSA virtually not long ago that the first quarter fatality projections for 2021 show motor vehicle deaths are up. They're up dramatically, and we know that the speed is a big part of that. And we have data from our friends at the National Safety Council that we're going to hear from shortly. They have that data as well. So the bottom line is we have to do more. We have to be better. We have to pivot to a safe system approach. That's not going to happen overnight. We can't wait for some of the engineering solutions to be ready to go. We've got to do things now. So we've brought together some of the best experts around the country to talk about this issue and to give highway safety offices and their partners some advice. I'm going to briefly introduce our expert panel. It's a good one, and we'll then get started. We're first going to hear from Melissa Wandall, who is the president of the Mark Wandall Foundation and the National Coalition for Safe Roads. Melissa is a survivor advocate. She's trained me not to say victim advocate. She's a survivor advocate who's turned her tragedy into action and reminds us really all why we're here and gives us some of that motivation and persistence to keep going even amongst some of the most difficult times. We have Lorraine Martin, the president and CEO of the National Safety Council. She has been an expert in safety throughout her many-year career. Safety has been her guiding principle. She began her career as a U.S. Air Force officer and also had a long career at Lockheed Martin. I love the connection with Lockheed Martin because that's one area that states are active in working with employers, but probably not as active as they could be. That's a new area that we can really focus on as highway safety officers. We heard from Colonel Packard, the chief of the Colorado State Patrol, earlier in the week. I'm glad that he's back here to talk about speeding today. He's a 20-year veteran of the Colorado State Patrol. He provides leadership for more than 1,200 staff members. And as we heard on Monday, safety is his guiding principle as well. Love to hear that leadership in law enforcement. Our friend, David Ocamb, recently joined Stratacomm, and we say recently joined Stratacomm. He started Monday in his new position as Vice President of Research, Planning, and Strategy. It's hard enough to start a new job during a pandemic, but it's also hard enough to start it when you're at a conference somewhere. So we appreciate David and his many years of support and guidance. He's going to talk to us about how do we reach the public? How do we actually impact behavior change? And last but not least is our good friend, Sandy Spavone. Sandy is the Executive Director of the Family, Community, and I'm going to say it, FCCLA, I'll just say that. We all know Sandy for her work around youth safety. She is an educator and she knows how to reach youth. We've had a lot of success reaching youth and drunk driving and speeding, or excuse me, drunk driving and seatbelts, but how do we get them on board with speeding? Sandy's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Well, you've heard enough from me, particularly over the last few days, so why don't we get into it and have some discussion. I'm going to ask Melissa to come on up and get us kicked off.
Good morning. It's really good to be here, right? To be here in person and to truly look one another in the eyes. And it's great for everybody that we have online watching us. But it's so great to look each other in the eye and make those promises to one another to truly find a way to drive down heartache on our roadways because human lives matter. And so I appreciate each one of you for being here and the work that you do every day. And roadway tragedy is commonplace. We can't make it commonplace anymore. It's not okay that people die on our roadways, and we can prevent it. So I hope you'll hear me today so that we can work together to drive down that insatiable heartache. So good morning, and thank you for having me here today. I thank God for the ability to be here, both as a contributor to the speed panel and also as a participant in GHSA's 2021 annual meeting. Since Sunday, we have all had the opportunity to attend amazing workshops, visit exhibitors, and participate in different sessions, all of which are intended to help us confidently forge a new traffic safety landscape. This year's meeting theme is Moving Mountains. It characterizes the importance and critical challenges we face as we emerge from a year of pandemic-related restrictions that change the way people around the nation work, interact, and travel. The value of educating ourselves and collaborating on transportation issues awards us the opportunity to improve and save lives. GHSA's vision is to lead states and territories towards zero deaths on the nation's roadways through leaderships, partnership, and advocacy. And ultimately, isn't that why we're all here today? To save lives and improve the quality of our communities. As the president of the National Coalition for Safer Road, as the ambassador for Alert Today Florida, opportunities such as this give me the platform, excuse me, to educate and empower others, encouraging them to work beside me so that we can achieve the goal of zero fatalities on our roadways. I want to embolden leaders, organizations, and associations of all types to embrace authentic leadership, inspiration, and resolution in order to get to zero. Whether you are participating in today's panel discussion with a background in advocacy, law enforcement, or state or federal highway safety, each one of you has a passionate why that drives you toward your mission every day. Always remain focused on your why, and you will continue to educate, encourage, and empower individuals and organizations for greater success and impact in your community. So why am I here today? Would you please play the video?
We're in the air. I just remember a lot of air rushing out of my chest. I remember taking a couple violent hits. I had blood running down my ear a little bit, and I had taken some glass down my throat, but you don't feel any of that stuff. The first concern is the person next to me, because I got to get him home safe, and I was begging for a cell phone.
I heard the phone ring and I was on my way to get it, but it just seemed like apparently it was taking me a long time, and a voice came over my answering machine.
Then I was frantic.
And I just heard the urgency that I needed to pick up the phone, pick up the phone, pick up the phone. Hurry, hurry, where are you, where are you? And I picked up the phone, and it was my brother.
And I asked her to please get down here and do Mark. I told her that Mark's not doing very well.
So my brother just kept saying, please get down here, please come, please come. And I got to the corner, and there were the lights and there were sirens.
So as I'm in there, I'm screaming, I'm pounding on the seat. I'm like, Mark, wake up, you can't leave. You have a wife, you have a daughter coming. And I'll never forget that this is something that only I will ever hear. As I'm yelling at him, I just hear a last breath.
My motivational why is my husband's untimely death and my brother's diminished quality of life as a crash survivor. There is no way that I can possibly summarize in a few short minutes how my entire life changed on the night of October 24th, the night my husband Mark was killed. My daughter will never know what it's like to have a dad. This crash was preventable. My daughter is now a senior in high school, and her next milestone is graduating. She will not have a father in her audience reflecting pride and joy in his eyes. A red light runner ended that dream of hers. One day, my daughter hopes to get married. Her dad will not be there to walk her down the aisle toward her future husband. Next year, my little baby, who was born just 2 weeks before this senseless crash, will leave for college. My home will be quiet, and who will I turn to? My husband was not here because he was killed by a speeding red light runner. Did this crash leave hope in its wake? Yes, it did, through our daughter, Madison Grace. Did this crash save many other lives? Yes, through a bill, the Wandall Traffic Safety Act, that allows red light safety cameras at the most dangerous intersections in the state of Florida. Did this crash create optimism for others who are grieving? Yes, through the Wandall Foundation, which provides authentic support and services to children, teens, and young adults who have had a parent, sibling, or guardian die. For this past 17 years, I've continued to love my husband through my advocacy and through my philanthropy, even though he's not physically here to feel my love. The crash that killed my husband was preventable, and in turn, so can be the deep and painful heartache I experience every morning when I wake up. Yes, I truly miss my husband, but I truly mourn the life that we never experienced together. The absence of family vacations, the options for additional children, sharing mornings and coffee together, praying together, and navigating life circumstances together as a team, and witnessing the beautiful interaction between daddy and daughter. I always dreamed this is what my life would look like. What about other families? Annually, 38,680 people die unnecessarily on our roadways. This number is staggering, and this number is preventable. If you magnify my immediate family, you will see that my parents are broken, my in-laws are broken, and sadly, my brother is broken in half. he will never be the same. He is emotionally debilitated and detached. He has struggled with opioid addictions since this crash for the last 18 years. He is 49 years old. He walks with a cane and he cannot work. His life has been destroyed by his own demons that have never been slayed. This crash was not his fault. In 2020, we had over 2.7 million people injured in crashes in this country. Imagine even a quarter of that 2.7 million people walking around just like my brother. For my daughter, I decided on October 24th of 2003 to utilize the crash that killed my husband as a motivation for my advocacy and philanthropy to showcase how a passionate why can make a positive impact. And you can help me. Collectively, we are all trying to save human lives. We must stop this insatiable heartache. We have been making strides along the way, but it is simply not enough. It is time to move mountains. If everyone in this room made the pledge to remind people that we can save lives, we will do just that. Start at home at your dinner table, then move on to your dinner parties with your friends. So many times we are on social media, we're distributing all these safety campaigns, we're tagging others, we're begging people to make better choices, that we don't look what's right in front of us. It's our own families and friends that are making dangerous decisions too. Good people are making bad choices. Let's educate and encourage them as well to make good decisions so they do not become that unintentional violator. I hope you hear me and sense the urgency in my heart. Please do not go home after this conference and be inspired for one day, one moment, or 1 week. Be inspired every day, because my story could become your story or your friend's story. Roadway tragedy does not discriminate. It is time to take our roadways back. When the work feels hard, remember the hard part is living without the one you need the most. And that can change for any one of us in less than a second. My husband and I, we love big and we love deep. I have no regrets at all. The only regret that I have is that we didn't have enough time together. And if I had no regrets in my marriage, I will be damned if I have any regrets in the aftermath of this crash. I will continue to move mountains every day to find a way to stop this unnecessary tragedy on our roadways. I am counting on you to educate, encourage, and empower best practices in order to save human lives, both physically and emotionally. We can all take what we do best in this industry and collectively work together to drive down heartache. As we cheer the introduction of the first ever congressional resolution calling for the national goal of 0 traffic deaths, we need help to enlist supporters and ensure that this encouraging step translates into action. If you want to help, please reach out to me. One more life-saving step. This is just one more life-saving step that we can truly reach together. The only thing we have to lose is another human life. And I, for one, I am not willing to take that risk. Our families, our friends, our fellow humans, and our colleagues are worth it. My why and your why may be fundamentally different, but resiliency, consistency, and focus are common threads of all of us in the work that we do. Regardless of your job title, if you stay motivated by your personal why and focused on GHSA's vision to move towards 0 deaths on the nation's roadways through leadership, partnership, and advocacy, lives will be saved. Remember your why and use it as a springboard to make positive change. Yes, we have work to do, but prevention is more manageable than picking up the pieces after tragedy occurs. I thank God for being here today to allow me to utilize my passion and my voice in order to encourage change. You are appreciated, and I am truly grateful. Thank you.
you know, I'm sorry, I've got to thank Melissa. As we turn to Lorraine and think about, you know, what Melissa just said. I've heard her story so many times, but I'm hit by it every time. Take our roadways back for Melissa's husband and for Melissa's daughter and all of our children. Everyone who's coming, and we're lucky to have a partner like the National Safety Council, and your visibility, Lorraine, as a CEO, says that you care about safety. So how do we do that?
Yeah, first I want to say thank you for sharing that story. I can't imagine how you do that, see that video, but we need it so much. So we say thank you. I think I can speak for everyone in this room that we need to hear the stories until there are no more stories like that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, teared up too. Sorry about that. Yeah, so thank you for having me here. I am the CEO of the National Safety Council, and I have a bunch of data for you here today, which hopefully can fuel our mission and make sure that we're focused in the right perspectives. Our mission is to make sure that we save lives from the workplace to any place. And for us, that includes roadways. And for many employers, it's still the highest risk activity that their employees partake in is on roads or in vehicles. So we like to say that we'd like to save lives on and off the job. And the roadways are a fantastic place for us to have impact there. Unfortunately, though, and Jonathan gave a little bit of a heads up there, and it was in our newsletter under our door this morning, we're headed in the wrong direction. The pandemic, for whatever reason, has really turned the tide. You gave a number of, I think, 38,000. In 2020, it was close to 42,000. And I have the exact data here, but a lot of progress that we've made, that this room has made, and your coworkers has been attrited over this very challenging time. I asked myself why, you know, what happened during the pandemic that caused our roadways to have more fatalities? And I have three things to maybe put on the table for us today to think about. And the first is anecdotally, and we have seen from some of the NHTSA analysis and others, it takes a while to get to true causation, that people sped more and they drove impaired and they drive without their seatbelt, all the things that we know save lives. During this pandemic of disruption and everybody's lives being upside down, we didn't do the things that we know can prevent fatalities on our roadways. The second is, and I got a chance to speak to someone in the elevator last night about safe systems. We know our roads were not designed per se to make sure that they provide the most safety possible when humans do make errors. And while that's a long-term and a holistic approach, it's something we have to get double down on and focus on and make sure we're using all those tools as we design roadways. We have a great opportunity with some of these infrastructure activities that our nation's going to take, hopefully, to make sure safety is forefront for all of those initiatives. And finally, and I think you mentioned it, Melissa, for whatever reason, our nation has found it somewhat acceptable, somewhat cavalier, that we literally every day last year lost 117 of our loved ones. And the outrage is just not there. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that here, and hopefully we'll continue that dialogue, is how do we create that outrage? How do we create that urgency for change that's just totally unacceptable? Those three things together caused our roadways to be more deadly. I have some of the data that I can share with you here. In 2020, 42,000 lives were lost. That is the highest number of roadway deaths in 13 years. That means all the amazing work, unfortunately, that all of you and GHSA have done in the last 13 years just evaporated for us. And we've got to figure out how we get back to where we were and then make the progress that we're all committed to. That is the staggering 24% increase year over year of the death rate. And that's 100 million vehicles, miles driven, and how many deaths? 24% increase in 2020. I have 21 data, I'll save that for later, but this is really, really startling for us all. I really want to ask us all to commit to the zero resolution. That was a bipartisan activity that was put on the floor here recently. I know many of the folks in this room, certainly GHSA supported that, so did we. We need to make sure that there's no death is acceptable on our roadways. It's going to take all of us. I can't wait to get into the discussion here today so that we can look at some of the techniques that we'll all need to make sure we're making that progress. Speeding is the topic of the day here, and I'll give you just a little tantalizing piece of information, and I got 1 minute left. If you're speeding on the roadway in a car and you're driving and a pedestrian is in your way, if you're at 20 miles an hour, out of 10 pedestrians that might get struck, one may lose their life. At 30 miles an hour, 5 of 10. And at 40, 9 of 10 are likely to lose their lives. Speeding kills, and speeding is something that we need to do something about. So we're glad to be here to have this discussion today.
Glad to have
Thank
you.
you.
And I want to highlight that we'll get into some of this on the discussion, but the Safety Council offers a ton of resources. Many highway safety offices already partner with the Safety Council, but if you're looking for a strong nonprofit partner, the Safety Council has a ton of great resources on their website, a ton of opportunities, and we'll dig into that a little bit later, but appreciate you being here. Colonel Packard, always good to see you. Thanks for coming twice in a few days. So take it away, sir.
Jonathan, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and for everybody for letting me talk a little bit about something I'm certainly passionate about. And Melissa, thank you for your comments and your advocacy and your passion in this traffic safety realm. Your story is moving. I wish I didn't have to say this, but I've heard that story in many different avenues. And I've got some thoughts to talk over today, but I just, in an effort to talk about how real this issue is, I left here Monday morning and I got on a plane and I flew to Lamar, Colorado. If you've never been here, but Lamar's in the bottom right corner of our state. And I'll mention a town called Wiley. Sometime on a break, Google Wiley, Colorado, and it's the smallest dot outside of Lamar. And while Wiley is very familiar to me is because last week, 5 teenagers between the ages of 14 and 16 were in a car speeding home to get home before curfew when they pulled out in front of a semi. And 4 of those 5 were killed in that crash in a moment's notice. And I left here that day, and after talking to our folks, I had the opportunity to go into the living room of the mom and dad of one of those young ladies that was killed in that crash. And that story and those moments are something will live in my mind forever, from those conversations to the scenes that we've worked at. And I'll echo Melissa's statement to say, don't ever forget what we're doing here. I have some numbers and data that we'll talk about as well. And Jonathan's asked me to talk about what we're doing specifically in Colorado. And numbers are an important tool to do that. I recall a conversation with my dad from years ago that he says, statistics are not a strategy. And I completely agree. However, statistics help us form strategy and make informed decisions. And they're important for us to have. But I will remember Kate for a long time and her story and the 3 young people that were with her in that car. I'll start here by telling you that my name is Matt Packard. I work for the Colorado State Patrol and I save lives. And I tell everybody that I work with in the patrol that when someone asks you what you do, tell them who you are, proudly tell them where you work, and tell them what you do here is you save lives. And that's how we approach our job every single day. We start my weekly meetings with my executive staff, and we talk about the fatal crashes that happened in the week since we last met. This Tuesday, it was 1 crash. It was 1 crash with 4 kids. The Tuesday before that, it was 5 crashes. And the Tuesday before that was, you can see this trend going. So we absolutely have work to do. And I will talk now specifically from an enforcement and a state patrol perspective. But I will tell you, this room is empowering to me because law enforcement is not the only solution to this problem. I think we're a key and important solution to this problem. But you have my commitment and my voice to my counterparts across this country that we will find a way to continue to reach out and find partners to have a multi-pronged approach and find new ways to tackle this problem. Because one more is one too many more. And we will do everything that we can. Speed has certainly emerged as a problem for us in Colorado, like it has across the country. We saw an interesting component, right? We saw a significant reduction in vehicle miles traveled across Colorado for the pandemic, and I suspect some other reasons. We can see that's building back, and interestingly, as of today, year to date, the State Patrol has investigated fewer fatalities in 2021 as compared to 2020. I think that's a good thing. Interestingly enough, the crash number is still going up, but fewer lives have been lost. We certainly have work to do, and I think we're a bit of a unique spot here in Colorado. And if I be so bold to take a little bit of credit for the right trend there, it's certainly, again, not just us, but some of the things that we're working on specifically is strict enforcement of speed, of course. We saw about a 48% increase in 2020 compared to 19 in speeding violations for violations over 40 miles an hour over the speed limit. When you think about 40 miles an hour over the speed limit, That's significant. We saw a significant increase in speeding violations with commercial motor vehicles as well. A lot of talk about reduction in traffic, but what you didn't see was a reduction in commercial motor vehicle traffic. Industry and the logistics of our society continue to push forward. We're certainly strained in finding ways to be more. And we saw a lot of significant speed increase, pretty alarming statistics, 62% increase in speeding violations over 40 miles an hour in commercial motor vehicles. Bulk of those are 80,000-pound trucks, right? That's a big deal. So enforcement has been important for us, but also outreach. And we will continue to be data-driven. We'll make sure our folks are in the right spots where these crashes are occurring, not where we can write fishing hole tickets. That's not what we're about. Writing meaningful speeding tickets. If you got a ticket from the state trooper, it's because you deserved it. And it's because you were doing a violation that we know is killing people, quite frankly. And that's continued how we will focus our resources. And finally, again, those outreach efforts targeted around certain events, certain age groups, demographics, pretty successful social media push and outreach regarding a slow your roll. But we're really trying to be multi-pronged in all of those facets. But again, I'd love to talk to more of you on the break, and I can't wait to hear from the panel about the different ways we can tackle this problem, because it is our neighbors. And I love your comment about convincing our family and friends to do the right thing. These aren't bad people. They're just making bad choices, and we can work together to solve that. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Colonel. I love the leadership, again, like with Lorraine, at the highest level, because that sets the tone for the organization. When the Colonel or the CEO says safety actually is #1 priority, that's why we're here. Everyone comes along. That's fantastic. So David, you're new at Stratacomm, but you're not new to working with highway safety officers, and you're not new with influencing the public.
Right.
So what are the tactics? What do we do?
Okay, well, before I jump into that, I'm a father, right? And so I have Connor, he's my son, and like every father out there, I'm gonna take a chance to like talk about him, right?
Sure.
So he's 2 years old. And about 2 months ago, he got really obsessed, as all 2-year-olds do, with the movie Cars, right? And so it's like, I wanna watch Cars, right? And so I bring him to daycare in the morning, and I was bringing him out to daycare, and I was gonna take my wife's car into the daycare because it had gas and my car needed to get gas. And so I was gonna do that. She drives a Volvo SUV, and he threw a temper tantrum. And he went like crazy, and he said, I want the race car, I want the race car. And I drive a hybrid sedan. It's not a race car here, right? But he was so obsessed because a sedan looks like Lightning McQueen, right? I also have a nephew. And so my nephew just got his driver's license, and I was following him on Instagram, and I saw a post for Fast and the Furious, and my mind went to, wow, that series has been on for freaking ever, right? And all of that's to say, from cradle onward, we are socializing people that speed is good, that we glorify speed in our society. And what about the paradox? What about the other side of the coin, right? Obeying speed limits? That's the butt of the joke. In every single sitcom, you have the grandpa who's going the speed limit, or people making fun of people, why won't you drive faster? Our society and our culture venerates speed and denigrates going the speed limit, obeying the speed limit. And so we as a traffic safety community, we have 4 pillars of death, right? We know impairment, distraction, seatbelt use, and speeding. Think of the campaigns, right? I'd ask you to raise your hand, but we don't really have that much time here. But a slogan for impairment, you guys all know it, right? A slogan for distracted, you guys all know it, right? Seatbelt, click it or ticket is iconic, right? Speeding, crickets. We are not treating each of these equally, and yet speeding increases the risk of crash and the likelihood to not survive a crash. We need to do better. We need public information and education campaigns that place speeding on the same level as others. And so if you've ever heard me speak, you know that the first thing I say when we need a campaign is to step back and what is the goal, right? And I think it's vital here that we analyze this question, because there could be 2 very distinct and very different goals when it comes to speeding. Goal number 1, what about high-risk aggressive drivers? We all know them, right? They're driving 20 miles over the speed limit. They're aggressively changing lanes. They're running red lights. We've heard over and over about them. If our goal really is that, there are cultural norms that condemn this behavior. We talk about that jackrabbit who's doing that, right? They shame that person. And so our goal needs to be a change behavior mindset, right? To where we target that audience and ask them to change their behavior. That's the messaging we want to get across. And I don't think it comes as a shock to anyone that my operating hypothesis, without doing the research, is that audience is going to be young males, right? And we know a lot about young males when it comes to messaging to them, and we know how to message to them. And so I would go into a research project with that same frame, that we need an enforcement-based messaging to reach those young males. But let's go on the other side of the aisle, right? What if our goal is normal speeding? Driving 30 to 35 in a 25, going 10 over on the highway, just going with the flow of traffic, right? I use the word normal very seriously and very intentionally here because it's a norm. A norm is an expectation that guides human behavior. And in our society, we are normed that speeding is acceptable, that it is the behavior that you are supposed to do. So if this is our goal, then the campaign is going to have to target all members of society. You're going to segment out, but you still target all of society. And that changes the societal goal, the attitude of people and how they perceive risk, and that speeding becomes a taboo, something that is forbidden in society. It's a right or wrong issue. It has to be a moral issue. So now I'm going to change change up a little bit and talk about two really important issues in this area, right? The first is enforcement. Right now, today, high risk aggressive driving is going to, if everything holds that we know, require an enforcement-based message, right? And enforcement messaging today is going to be really tough because of the world we live in. The world fundamentally changed post George Floyd right now. And so what we did in the past, we cannot continue to do going forward. Our messaging we have an obligation to law enforcement right now to ensure our communication builds their reputation, makes them look better in the communities they serve, helps them out. And so we have to focus on that, right? But we can still do enforcement messaging. The fear just cannot be the fear of the officer. It can be the fear of the cherries and berries, those lights behind you in the window. That's a valid fear. The penalties that come from that, that's a valid fear. We can still get that emotional trigger point we need to have. It just can't be scared of the officer. The officers, we need to portray a diverse group of officers out there helping the community, stepping in, saving lives, right? And so very briefly, I want to touch on this next issue area, technology, automated speed enforcement. If the goal is deterrence, we must measure the effectiveness of these devices by how few tickets are sent out, not how many. Few tickets means there's very little speeding. Lots of tickets means there's lots of speeding. From a messaging standpoint, the penalty you get in the mail the weeks later is not really a deterrent, right? It's not proximate to the actual thing. So what can we do? We can have signage alerting to the speed cameras. We can have Waze and Google alerting you that the speed is up. We can, honestly, at the end of the day, social media is going to be helpful here, right? We don't want to teach people not to speed in a specific area, so changing where the camera's up, it really could work. And the public backlash issue, because is it real? Yes, it absolutely could be real. We need public information and education campaigns prior to going out with speed cameras, with market research on how the public would accept them, to notify them that they're there, and then on an annual basis at least to remind them they're there and remind them why they're there going forward. And so with that, turn the podium.
Sandy, thank you for being here. Tell us what FCCLA is doing and what can we learn from the next generation coming?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you so much for sharing your personal stories today. I think one thing that I am always impressed with GHSA is that they keep teens as part of the picture. And with FCCLA and SAD and other student organizations that are there trying to address safety with teens, one of the main pieces that we always say, if it's about us, don't do it without us. And so empowering and engaging the teens has to be part of the solution. If we want to get to zero, they have to be part of that or we won't get there. And so as you talked about the different campaigns and the slogans that we've done some testing with the students with some of the slogans, and does it work? Is it effective? Does it make them behave differently? And what that looks like. So as we address speeding, I think we have to continue to look at that from their eyes and their perspective. FCCLA and our organization is focused in schools. So we're inside middle schools and high schools, and we empower the teens to do projects. And a lot of the goal of the projects is to teach them career preparation. But in that process, they're learning about the topics. They're engaging in their community. We ask them to go out and survey community members. And the key word in both of families, careers, Community Leaders of America, and our traffic safety program starts with families acting for community traffic safety. And I really believe that as we've heard the stories, you talked about going to the family, you talked about how the crash impacted your family. A lot of teens will tell us that that's the trigger that might make them behave differently. They're not going to be a number because they're invincible. It won't happen to them. It might happen to somebody else, but not them. You know, and when they see a real person with a real story, with a family that's been impacted, it means something more to them because it's not a number. So that's really important, I think, as we continue to learn from what worked with getting them to wear seat belts and then now getting them to slow down and not speed. We don't know, I think, the impact of COVID on our youth. You shared that they were getting back late from curfew. I hear that from the kids, that there's a lot of pressure to get to work. We have a worker shortage, so teens are doing the jobs that nobody else will do in a lot of cases. So they're going from school to work and trying to get home, going to football, and they're doing all of that driving, and they're on the roads with our families, you know, and they don't necessarily know and don't put a face to who's in that seat beside them in that other car and how their actions can do that. But at the root of that is, if as we as adults and family members don't set an example of obeying speed limits, then they're going to think they don't need to too. We learned that with seat belts. We learned that with texting and driving. You know, at first it was like, well, I'm a better driver, so I can use my phone, but you're an novice driver, so you shouldn't, you know, and then they said, well, I'm better at using the phone than you are. So we really have to keep that into perspective and continue to engage and empower the youth. We have great partnerships with GHSA that comes out with research that helps us all develop projects with the teens and give them the ideas. We have great partnerships with many GHSA that help support the teens in their projects so that they can go out and use peer-to-peer education to talk to their peers about this. So it's from their voice to their peers' voice about making right decisions and the impact that their right decisions can have on their friends. So you had a teenage driver with probably too many passengers in that car as well, trying to meet curfew. That's a nightmare story. You put that together. So how can we as adults set the example, empower them with resources like the Ford Academy is a great resource that our teens use to implement their projects, and also making sure we're giving them the resources, supporting them, and as GHSA does always, to make them part of the solution is really important. So thank you for your commitment to empowering and engaging teens, to getting us to zero, and to looking at this epidemic of speed within the teen population.
Thanks, Sandy, and thanks for your years of partnership. Many highway safety officers work with you, and I think it's an opportunity for the governor's highway safety reps in the room and those online to think about how we're reaching new people. We've talked about that in a lot of this conference. We just can't go to the same organizations and the same subrecipients every year and expect something different to happen. So if you're not working with FCCLA, I would encourage you to do so as well and talk to Sandy later today. Appreciate all the reminders about why we're here. It's not just about the numbers. These are our mothers, these are our fathers, our siblings, our husbands. And we have to stay focused on that. We talked about impaired driving a lot yesterday, and we have people from MAD in the room and online. Where's the MAD for speeding? How do we get a MAD for speeding? How can we start that? How can highway safety offices support that? I'm probably looking at Melissa and Lorraine for your advocacy work, but any of you feel free to jump in.
Go ahead. Well, one thing I would say is that I think employers, and you hinted at this early, can play a role. In all of our communities, we have employers who are basically overseeing the community members who come to their workplace. And they can start to set some expectations around specifically speeding or specifically roadway safety, not only when you're working for me and doing my job, but in your entire life. We have seen employers, lean into some things. Remember, the first place you couldn't smoke was probably at work, right? Then restaurants and everything else followed. Workplaces can lead here. And they can say, when you're driving, whether it's for yourself or for us, we expect you to drive safely. And I don't know if other advocacy groups could be formed through some of the employer activities, but they are a very, very important piece of this equation. And I would suggest that we enlist their support for that same activity in our communities.
Yeah, I agree. And especially like the commercial trucking, as we saw yesterday, that devastating and the distracted driving workshop was amazing. And to see the devastation of what's happening with our drivers, our commercial drivers especially, they can't stop. They can't stop, and they're in their vehicles for a very long time. They've gotten used to driving, so they think they can get used to utilizing that cell phone too, because they've done it so many times before. And look what happens. The violator devastates a family and devastates his own family. So I think the more that we can get our employers on board to be able to say, no, this is not okay, this is not acceptable, we have to make sure. But again, it really starts at the dinner table. And I really say that because a lot of times we forget, we're talking about what we do in our work, but we don't have deep conversations about that with our own families because we just think that they're, you know, that they're going to pay attention because of what we do. And that's really not what happens out there.
Unfortunately, there are too many survivor advocates out there. These stories are not rare, Melissa. How can highway safety offices find the Melissa in their state to help carry this water? Because we know that has impact at the legislature. It's not the highway safety office or people like Lorraine or myself going up there. It's people like you that they'll listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's more and more every day. The National Safety Council has tons of advocates, Families for Safe Streets. It's just growing all over this country. And in fact, in New York City this weekend, they had 6 people that were killed in 6 different crashes in New York City from a 3-month-old baby on. And so now there's even more advocates. So Families for Safe Streets, you reach out to me, I'll give you links to where to go. The Vision Zero Network has tons of advocates we can find in your state. And of course, the National Safety Council. We all work together to really pull those resources together because you really are not going to do what you want to do without having those voices. They really do matter. But one thing you have to remember when you're working with advocates, it's hard work. It's really hard. It's emotionally challenging. It's emotionally charged. And the great thing about people like Families for Safe Streets and the National Safety Council is they can almost deploy different advocates. You know, in Florida, unfortunately, there's not a lot of people that stand up beside me because they say they just can't, because you do have advocates that just can't stand up. But definitely National Safety Council and Families for Safe Streets utilize those voices because people want to speak out. They want to share their stories in order to save lives.
Thank you. We know one of the areas where we need more advocacy is around automated enforcement. We've had discussions at this conference about the transportation infrastructure bill that is hopefully going to be signed and passed in the next coming weeks. And one of the changes it makes is it allows highway safety officers to have more engagement potentially around automated enforcement in work zones and school zones. And that's really exciting, but we've got to get the public on board. How do we do that both from a advocacy and communications and standpoint? So, you know, feel free to jump in, Dave. David, I see your hand.
Yeah, so we always talk about education and enforcement, and they always run hand in hand. I think far too many people segregate the two, but without enforcement, you can't have education. It works. And without education, enforcement, it's a stocked pond. You cannot get all of the people off the road. And so we can't just look at automated enforcement and say, well, there's these machines that are autonomous that are doing their job without thinking through how do we educate the public about it? How do we normalize them? How do we utilize them to amplify the messaging and to make them more effective? Because they're a tool, they're a tactic. How do they fit into the greater strategy of reducing speed on our roads? And so that's where I think we really need to come together as a community. Your public information and education campaign and your advertising partner really needs to work with the law enforcement agency that is putting those cameras in place on how to message that going forward. I think that's an important step, and I don't know that it happens as much as it should.
Yeah, you know, there's this chasm, right, where people see photo radar, for example, and they immediately think to, you know, revenue grab, right? This is some governmental, that's what the thought process is, and nobody gets the other side of the story, right? The real reason that it's there. I'm not going to pretend that we put those up in all the right spots, right? We make poor decisions sometimes, but we got to be thoughtful and then explain why we're putting things where they are. And to finding those, going back to finding the people that will be advocates for us, how you find those people, talk to your law enforcement agencies. These are, there are police officers and victim advocates and state troopers that are talking to these families and get to know them, and can find it. Melissa is an anomaly, right? Mm-hmm. The people that have the courage and the strength to come up and tell their story, that's not normal, but we meet those. But to be able to pair that with the different enforcement techniques, that's how we bridge that gap. But you know, read our Facebook posts. Every time we do a speed enforcement, you know, campaign about and trying to tell a story, half the responses are whatever, you're going for money, you're stealing our money, highway, the piracy they call us, right? All these different things. There's this gap they don't understand, and I think that's the education component. We've got to explain to people what's at risk, and we're not there yet.
And if I could add a little bit to that, I think it's so important to communicate. We do know there have been places where we may not have done it right the first time, as you just acknowledged. making sure that we're very clear. We're putting the automated enforcement where people are dying or getting in crashes because of something, a bad intersection, speeding, red lights, whatever it is. To be very clear, that's where we're putting them. And I think a lot of times we haven't had that clarity or that communications. I would also say we have a checklist at the NSC to help communities and law enforcement walk through how to be very transparent about this and ensure that you're using them in a way that's truly going to have the safety impact you're looking for, not potentially revenue or any other motivation that someone might assume. I'll give you a little bit of data on this. Where there is an automated enforcement, speeding goes down 14%. You want people to know it's there, right? So you're not sending them the ticket. And another important, you said a lot of people can go 40 miles over the hour, 40 miles over the speed limit. Where there's an automated enforcement, 82% decrease in folks that go over 10 miles more than the speed limit. That's huge. And they need to know they're there in order for their behavior to change in the first place. So I really like that you put right up front, David, it's about communicating why, where, and then making sure folks understand the consequences.
Well, and you brought up a very important point. It's an ongoing dialogue. The communication doesn't stop when you put the camera up and do your initial campaign. And you talked about talking about the impact, the reduction. And I was reading, it was either the Washington Post or the Baltimore Sun recently, and they were talking about the Maryland cameras in work zones and how revenue has declined year over year over year since they've been in place. That's a success story. That's something, and I want to commend Maryland for putting that out there, because that's the kind of information we need to be putting out there in the media, in social media, across the board.
Yes, and if I can say, because this is my wheelhouse, this is where I can't say I'm sitting on my hands waiting to speak. But what we forget is automated enforcement is a safety tool. It's a safety net, and it works in conjunction with law enforcement, education, right? Advocacy and engineering. It's every little piece that it's going to save lives. So when we automatically say, well, that's stale, I don't want to. Number one, people are running, people are speeding if they get caught on the camera, if they're running red lights, if they're running a school bus arm, they're breaking a safety law that is going to take somebody else's life. We cannot have law enforcement everywhere. It is not enough. So they work in conjunction together. And as far as a good working program, when you engage, so we passed the bill, the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act in Florida. And let me tell you something, if anybody knows anything about legislators, you know our Florida Senate and representatives, they are not easy to work with. And it took 5 years of education and advocacy in order to pass that bill, but we made sure that that bill was a good working bill. We have $3 per ticket that goes to the Miami Project to cure paralysis. We have $10 per ticket that goes to 22 level 1 trauma centers in the state of Florida. So our money in the state of Florida, that when somebody does run a red light and is being ticketed for it, and yes, we do want revenue to go down 100%, but when it does, it is going to good causes. And we just have to be committed. We have to know, like as an advocate, I can't just talk with my heart. I have to have authentic knowledge, because if I don't have that critical, articulate knowledge about those cameras, then I'm going to get basically shot down by the politicians and about the papers. And you have to be able to authentically, you know, be encouraged by your program. But automated enforcement does save lives. And if they were not in the state of Florida after 17 years, I would pull my husband's name off that bill. Thank
Sandy, youth love technology. They understand it better than we do. Am I naive to be hopeful that this is a generational change?
It's what I was sitting here thinking, is that the youth a lot of times will use apps even that alert them that there is a red light camera or something up ahead, and it's like mom and dad in the backseat watching, you know, so they're part of that. And I think that they're more comfortable with that piece. Information does get back to mom and dad that they broke the rule too, which allows for another safety message. But no, Jonathan, I think you're right. I think that this can be part of the generational change, that this is a really cool group of youth out there right now. They want change and they want to be part of the solution. So if there is an opportunity where you want to, you have a new red light camera and the teens can embrace and do some community messaging from them, from their voices saying, this is good for all of us. How can an adult, attack a student about that? So sometimes using their passion to be change makers and giving them something to use that passion where they can actually see action happen encourages them to continue to become advocates and to go into the field of safety and be part of the solution. So I think you're right on track, Jonathan.
And I think my Twitter feed is pretty good and biased, but if we can get youth to be sharing social media messages organically about enforcement, about safety, about speeding, just as we've done around seatbelts and drunk driving, that's how you change behavior. That's organic, and you can't beat that.
We have a partnership with the National Road Safety Foundation, and each year the students create their own public service announcement, a PSA, and what these kids can do and the messages that they come up with sometimes is much better, than a PR firm because they're messaging to their peers. And each year we pick a theme, and this year is speed prevention. So I'm really looking forward to the data that we've collected, these conversations to give to the students so that they can create messaging to their peers in that way and distribute that then. So I think they can be part of that solution.
Oh, they have to be. They have to be part of that solution. I was just reading Adweek, and they had an article on user-generated content in Gen Z, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, in the past, with our victim-centric messaging, it came through a TV ad and through a campaign like that. That's not how it works anymore. We need to go through TikTok and through other social networks, probably less so on the Twitter. Jonathan's like
Dating myself again.
Yeah.
No reading glasses though.
You got to focus on, and I'm dating myself too. You got to focus on TikTok and the gram, right? And let them own the content. Let them create it. Don't put restrictions on what they can and cannot do. You're giving up control, but that's what works because it's authentic. It's in their voice. And they will create some fun, interesting content, and it will, quote unquote, go viral like we all want it to do.
That's their goal, right?
Right. And that's how they interact with the world. But through micro influencers, through boosting that up, that's really an effective channel right now to highlight their lived experience and what's going on. And we just need to give them the microphone, so to speak, and ask them to do it.
I love it. I walk into a room and I tell people what I do, and they can give my speech, right? I walk in, they're like, oh, he's a state trooper. He's going to tell me to put my phone down, drive the speed limit, don't drink and drive. They know it.
Yeah.
Like they literally can give my speech. But when it comes from them, someone they care about, someone they're influenced, it has so much more power. And I mean, you think about that in my own life, when I'm somebody that I care about is telling me something that they're passionate about, it changes the way I think about it. It happens like that. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, and we've talked about the dining room table a few times, and not all parents are going to know what to say to help change the behavior of their teens. So one of the things that we did partner with some folks to put together are some little sort of micro classes for parents to make sure that they can have those tools to have those discussions. We have something called a Live at 25. It gets to the point. You want to make sure your teen and your young adult gets to that age of 25, which is the highest risk behavior on roadways. And hopefully folks find those resources useful, because not all parents are going to know how to have those conversations, how to really get through to their teens on this issue.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. We've heard a lot about the safe system approach, and Lorraine, you mentioned it. We had a great call to action from Chair Hamady on Monday. GHSA has a new project with NSC and some others around safe system. And one of the tenets is that we have to acknowledge humans make mistakes. But when we're talking about driving drunk or driving drugged or 20 miles an hour above the speed limit, that's not a mistake. That's a choice that somebody's making. And so where does that fit in? How do we address that in the safe system approach?
The human who's put himself at risk or herself unnecessarily. Safe systems say that you're using all the tools available to you, making sure that the roads are designed correctly, the cars have the technology in them that can support safe operation, and that we educate users on how to be on those streets, whether they're in a car or a pedestrian or other modalities, so that they're using the streets safely. And so for drivers who choose to put themselves more at risk than others by not driving the way that we would say is the safest, we're going to have to go back to issues of education, and even technology to some degree can help with that. In cars, we know that there are ignition tools that can say you can't drive the car if you're drunk. We haven't made those standard on cars. We haven't had legislation around that. Those are all pieces of safe systems that can help us when humans have, make mistakes, have errors. At the same time, when folks go and do something that exacerbates their safety parameters, we have to have all the tools that we knew of: enforcement, technology, education, and those are all part of safe systems too. It's not a one size, just design the road right. It's having that complete continuum of what we know safety measures are and designing for all of those to be a benefit to us. And we don't do that today.
I think we need to do a better job of explaining what's at risk. And you talk about impaired driving, and I think we're to the point now where people understand that driving drunk or impaired is dangerous. People, they get that. Now, there are a segment of the population who will talk about, yeah, but I'm okay, or I'm good at driving drunk, God forbid, right? But there's that group of people that we're still struggling. But generally speaking, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody out there that would say driving drunk is safe, right? That is not the case when we talk about speed. Right now, when I pull over a car, when our trooper pulls over a car and they say, I stopped you for going, whatever, and any reason for your speed today? And the answer is, yeah, I'm running late. Or I'm trying to get home for this, or whatever's going on. It's a choice that they understand what the speed limit is, but there is no associated risk. The only associated risk is I might meet a state trooper, right? There's no acknowledgement of what's really going on. And I think that's part of this hill that we need to get over, is we can do a better job of explaining why speed is risky. It's more than just you, right? When that person, this morning, if I drove a marked car, heaven's sakes, I don't know that I'd ever get to anywhere, but this morning there's a pickup truck for a roofing company that is beating feet weaving in and out of traffic, and the trooper in me, right, but I got to get downtown. But that person is late to a job. That person has, I'm putting words in his mouth, has no idea, or no acknowledgement anyway, of the risk that he's putting himself and everybody else on I-25 that morning. We can do a better job of explaining that and pushing that message out, because we don't. We're good at this, and I think there's a part showing stacks of tickets that we wrote last weekend for speeding, but we never get to the next part of that. And that's not going to be a solution we solve overnight, but I think that's something we can do better at.
And I think there needs to be both enforcement and employer expectation. And you can put technology in that van so that it can't speed, or that if it does and it has risky behavior, that the employer knows about it. And some companies are doing that, and I think that we'd be well served for more to do.
That's the what, but who's the who? Like who's going to do this? The highway safety has a role, office has a role, employers. Like how are we going to do this? Thinking back to Click It or Ticket and some of the other successes we've had.
It's a fully integrated normalization campaign. We need to normalize driving the speed limit and make it taboo to not drive the speed limit. In a fully integrated campaign, again, most people think of just like the TV spot or the out of home or the radio, but it's the partnerships. It's the experiential, it's the social, digital, organic, right? It's all of that coming together in an integrated way. And that's what needs to happen. It needs to be a collaborative effort with law enforcement, with everyone coming together, all of us doing our part in an organized way so that everything we do is efficient and is advancing the same goal and on the same message.
I love your answer early on, Lorraine, around safe system, and that we can do many things at once. It seems like sometimes it's a false choice. Are you going to do infrastructure? Are you going to do behavior? Are you going to enforcement? Actually, have to do everything. And we seem to have forgotten in our country in a lot of areas that we can do a lot of different things at once, and we can do them well. Before we go to questions, if you had one thing, again, knowing we can do a lot of things, but one thing that the Highway Safety Office should be doing more of, what would that be? I'll give you a second, because I think that that should be a takeaway. Sometimes conferences can give you go back home and you've got 25 things you need to do. Like, what's the one thing that if you were the director of a highway safety office, you would do first to address speeding?
I could say, give me more money, right? But in all sincerity, and in our highway safety office, we've had this conversation a lot, and we're getting better at it. I think from an enforcement perspective, the more flexible we can be to use resources where our data shows that we need to be, the better off we are. I used to tell people when I'd go out and work on July 4th, or New Year's Eve, the only drunks that I'm going to find tonight are the amateurs. Everybody knows we're out here. It's going to be the 20-year-old that, that's who I'm catching tonight. But if I know that my data shows that the weekend of September 22nd, I've got an issue, or I know this event's going to happen in Wiley, Colorado, that I can use additional resources to flex into those spaces. And I think the more ability we have to adjust, this is a national problem with local issues. And so we can flex into some of those local issues with a lot of these different tools from an enforcement perspective, I think would be really helpful. And I've got data that shows that when we do that, it works.
Yeah, the one I'd give you is to destigmatize, demystify, whatever it is, automated enforcement, to really help communities, jurisdictions, put it in place correctly for the right reasons with all the data around it, because it does save lives. And the data says it causes people not to speed. So anything we can do to have, a better understanding of not only the impact, but also doing it correctly would be very helpful.
Agreed. And then also just don't use one person, just keep 30-second PSAs, 15-second PSAs, keep flashing real people that have lost real human beings on our roadways. And just, we could 360 days a week. We have so many people that have lost loved ones on our highways. So just keep showing those faces, keep sharing that messaging. Not just every once in a while, but every day it can be done.
I'd say the one thing I don't want anyone to do is to immediately go home and just practice a tactic. Think, I'm going to have a press conference, I'm going to cut a TV spot, I'm going to do something, right? That's dangerous. You want to actually plan an integrated campaign and treat it the same as you treat occupant protection, the same as you treat impaired driving, the same as you treat distracted driving. There are 4 pillars of death. Put all 4 of them on that same footing.
I would say engage the youth, have a summit, have a listening session. If you're planning a campaign, make sure you run it past some teens to make sure the messaging is there. And each year, FCCLA sends GHSA reps the Families Acting for Community Traffic Safety facts, as we call them, projects to your office so you can review what the teens are doing. If you want them to focus on a particular topic, we're willing to do that for you and give them feedback. These are the teens trying to make change in your state, and they would love to hear from you and be a voice for you to their peers.
Jonathan, if I can, just one other thought there is force us to collaborate. It's easy for us to talk to the people that we're comfortable with in the rooms and use the resources that I know are at my fingertips, but you can force us to get outside of our comfort zone and we'll all be better for it.
Well, let's get some feedback and some questions from the audience. We'll start with folks in the room. Tim, if you happen to see any good questions or any questions that have come in on the hashtag GHSA 2021, we'll try to get those in as well. But questions or comments from the room? Sir?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Every single point that was made up there is just so important. My name is Tom Antko. Hi, Melissa. Melissa and I have something in common. My daughter, Melissa, was killed by a novice driver in 1999, 3 days before Christmas. And I've run across Melissa in the past as the president of the Driving School Association of the Americas. I started in this industry in 1973. This is where you're supposed to say, oh, you look so young. and consequently, I've seen a lot of things. My father was a police officer for 35 years in New York, so I'm very familiar with law enforcement. The one thing that's key, and I'm sorry, I got in late, so I'm not quite sure of your name, but I've been involved with your organization. Education early, and early involvement, because we don't have consistent driver education in the schools anymore in most of the places I've visited, and getting to the youth early enough and having them learn how to make their parents accountable for their driving behavior is a really key element. Automated enforcement, taking away the stigma of that, is critical. Red light cameras, radar control. There's more drivers than there are police officers to enforce the laws. And frankly, the consequences for bad behavior have to get stricter, not only from a judicial standpoint, because the police officers are doing their job, but the courts are letting people off the hook a lot of times, and the consequences for bad behavior have to be more enforced and consequential. So I really appreciate it. I'm here in the GHSA for the first time. I'm loving everything that I'm hearing and seeing, and I just hope I can do more in the future to help make the roads a lot safer. Thanks. I don't have a question. I just wanted to stand up on a soapbox.
Well, thanks for being here. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I guess I will have a question, but I wonder, throughout the discussion, and it's been really great, we're sort of going by on the assumption that any speed limit anywhere is reasonable, it's right. You know, I have read research that says that speed differential, the difference in the speeds between the slowest car and the fastest cars, is perhaps a bigger problem than the speeding itself. And I know there are some places where for some reason highways never raised their speed limits after the 55-mile-an-hour limit was repealed. And my personal example is I-66 going in and out of Washington, D.C., a very wide divided lane interstate. Speed limit is 55. The locals are all driving 75 and the tourists are driving about 60, trying to figure out why everyone's going so fast. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that, the whole idea of the reasonableness of speed limits, possibly the whole 85th percentile rule and those issues. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I guess I could start on that. And I think the question is sort of how to think about what speed limits to set. And it sounds like they change often across roads. But I think the most important thing is to really, for the folks that are setting them, to really extend the factors that they're using and not use the 85 percentile approach. How it was originally designed, because that's what you have in front of you. And really look at the safety at that time. Make sure you understand how it's when it was originally constructed, and also making sure you put some of these techniques in place that we've talked about, like automated enforcement. And you know, we would really recommend that local control, the folks that have the data, that know how the roads are being used, what speeding is occurring, what needs to traverse across that stretch of highway or roadway, and have some ability to set the right speed limits for safety, as opposed to what the road originally was designed to potentially support.
Yeah, I agree. If I could add a little bit about that, harkening back to when my dad was teaching me to drive, and that don't be afraid of the freeway. We're all going roughly the same speed in the same direction. It's actually a pretty safe place to go. And I had that same conversation with my kids, but they were really scared to get on the freeway. But because I agree, it's not the speed, it's the change, right? And the difference between what's around you. Some of it's not moving, and it's really hard. But I will tell you, I'm an advocate for variable speed limits. And I think it's one of the things that we've seen a lot of success in Colorado, particularly in construction areas, where it's the ability to lower the speed limit based on road conditions, whether that's weather related, whether it's congestion related. And you have people that are making conscious local based decisions what's going out there on the road. And I think a key component to that too is, and I'm included in this group, technology like Google or Waze or some of those things, where people aren't looking for signs anymore. They're looking at their GPS to tell them what the speed limit is. And there's got to be a connection there for that. For the record, I love that, because I can say there's a cop hidden right here and right here when I'm driving down that, because it works. But if we can have information that's getting to inside the car specific to speed limits, that helps.
It's not a gotcha. I love that. And as far as the apps, there's a lot of debate about, should we let people know on the apps if there's enforcement out there? It's not a gotcha. So the more people know. John, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is John Saunders, and I serve as director of the DMV's Virginia Highway Safety Office. Also serve as regional representative here at GHSA. And I'm the elevator person that we talked to Lorraine last night as we talked about the shared system approach. And I really believe that this system approach that we're talking about has the potential of being that wow that we've been looking for years to get us off of this plateau of fatalities. But we've got to buy into it. We've got to want to do it. We've got to want to change. So I'm in with you 100%. And we've got to just be strong with that message to get people to buy into it. I'm concerned when I talk about fatalities, and I know in the Black and Indigenous community, our numbers are disproportionately higher. In those
Can you speak up a little bit, John?
I'm sorry. I'm concerned when I see the fatality numbers and understand the disproportionately higher rate that we see with Blacks and Indigenous in our country in those areas. And when I see a panel like this that we brought together, that we lack that diversity. I don't have a voice really at the table today that can really talk to what are the problems we see. Why can't we get that message to those communities? Where are we lacking in that? And what are the problems we're facing? that concerns me. It concerns me when I look at the nonprofits and I look at who is on their boards and I don't see any diversity. It's not there. Until we are willing to bring every voice to the table. We need to have the voices to the table who have these concerns and know what the problems are in the community. And yes, you're right, there are community leaders we need to get to, and we know who those are in our communities. And yes, we need to make folks feel uncomfortable. I truly believe that, because if they don't feel uncomfortable, it's going to be status quo. We're past that point. I'm trying to get to a question, but I'm not sure what it is. I guess, I guess the question is, I guess I'm frustrated. I've become more frustrated. I've come to these conferences probably for 15 years now, and this is probably this year is the most I've ever stood up. But I've come to a point now that I understand enough is enough, and I can't stand it any longer. There was on your website, National Safety Council website, there is a video by Denzel Washington that I read this morning called Life's Advice. And in that video, it says, if you watch this video, it will impact your life. And it's true. Watch that video. And he tells you about what life is truly about, what he has went through, and what we need to go through, and what priorities we need to set about what we need to accomplish in this life. And it's a very short journey that we're on. Is there a question? Help me. Okay, thank you.
Can I respond?
Please.
Thank you for that. And it does take courage for us all to make sure we're talking about all of our community members and ensuring they're all as safe. We often talk about the 3 E's: education, engineering, and enforcement. Equity needs to be our 4th E. We know that there are some streets that are not as safe. We know there are some communities that are not as safe on their streets. We need to figure out why and make sure that we're putting our resources where folks are getting injured and dying on our roadways. I have 2 stats I'll give you, and you just sort of think about them a bit. When we think about pedestrian fatalities, and I gave a little bit up front regarding pedestrian fatalities, right now, a Black person, if it was struck by a car as a pedestrian, has an 82% higher rate of fatality than a white person. I'm sorry, a Asian and or Native American and Alaskan, 221% higher. Something's going on. We need to look at it. We don't all know the answers to it. The data is very helpful to say, let's focus on it and have discussion and figure out how we make sure that everyone is safe on our roadways as pedestrians, as folks in vehicles, and that we care for every human that may be putting their life at risk.
I also refer folks to nsc.org for their equity statement, and I'm biased a little bit, but GHSA, I think, also has a very progressive statement and report on equity at ghsa.org. So we have a little bit of time left, so let's do a lightning round with 2 more quick questions. Rob?
Thank you, Jonathan, the panel. So being a director of a local state highway safety office, we've been fairly successful at motivating officers. We cracked the code of motivating law enforcement. And it's keeping it simple of give them stuff. Give them stuff, give them tools to do the job. And we've sponsored over $1 million in speed timing equipment to our grantees to do the job. The problem that's coming back from them when we question them about it, yes, you're doing job 1 of, you said you were going to spend our money, you did that. But are you being effective at doing so? And what they're telling us is that they're being told to slow their roll. So instead of the public speeding, the officers are being to slow down their enforcement right now, not make as many traffic stops. So my question is, how do we convey that to the law enforcement leaders in a similar position as the colonel, that speed as enforcement right now is extremely important? How do we get that message to them to tell them to tell everybody else to slow their roll and not the officers that are trying to make a difference?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something we struggle with a lot, and there's particularly right now with a lot of the social justice conversation, and there's a pretty bright light specifically on traffic enforcement, a pretty strong narrative about minor violations and things. And we were trying to pass a bill in Colorado where 2 years ago now, I guess, and the legislator said, well, we don't want people to lose for just like speeding 5 over. Man, do we need to have a conversation. So I think, in my opinion, and at least the way that I've approached it, is we can do a better job of explaining. It's what we've talked about, explaining why we're doing what we're doing. And every chance I get, I will make a connection between traffic enforcement and quality of life. And there isn't a police chief in North America that doesn't get beat up about burglaries or property crimes or vandalism, all of those things that their community members see and feel and in their belief take away from their quality of life. And so it's logical that we would focus on those things. Well, traffic is a quality of life issue. And we can talk about the life safety component that we talk about today a lot, which I genuinely believe, and how that's not the big bell ringer, I don't know. But then there's other things, right? You know, when people crash, your commute to work is longer, right? Because now you're stuck in traffic. You can talk about the economic impacts of when all of these traffic incidents are going on. I just think there's a lot of multifaceted ways. And the first stop, however, is to stop talking about the number of traffic stops. Let's talk about the number of crashes that we're having, the number of people that are getting hurt, the number of people that are being killed, and then talk about how this enforcement directly correlates with driving those numbers down. That's the narrative that we need to talk about, because that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you. Put it back to people. Last question, sir.
I'll be quick, lightning round. My name's Dennis Dempsey. I'm with the City of Aurora Police Department here in the metro area. Got about 17 plus years in traffic enforcement between here and South Florida. From a enforcement on an officer standpoint, we've seen a big rise in the glorification of running from the police. The street racers, the motorcycles, even just your everyday vehicle, there's cameras in their cars. That's not for insurance purposes. It's the purpose for putting themselves on YouTube. When we go to stop them, they immediately take off. Has there been a push to do some type of educational with Melissa's video, the video from yesterday with the distracted driving in Minnesota, I believe? If we could put that at the beginning of a Fast and Furious movie during previews, that has an impact. You could see, if you look around the room after those videos, the impact that it made. That's how to get through to some of these people. Do it there where they're all together. Social media, they can delete, they can swipe, they can do this and that. So yes, but do it to where they all gather, because after those movies, from working the enforcement, they all gather together, they go out and they race.
Yeah.
So have we looked at that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments?
Well, I think that's going to be a vital component of the campaign. And I think you do need a campaign first. And the campaign, that should be a tactic. And as I mentioned, user-generated content. I remember, I think it was TikTok was the platform that was on, where they had a contest or whatever they do, right? And it was to see how fast you could go and to show the speedometer as you went up, right? And that was something that got promoted out. And we have to counter program. We have to come up with organic content. It's not going to be me as the ad guy saying, here is the spot. It's coming from the ground up. It's them saying, here is our content, and amplifying that and giving them the microphone to where they can promote out their materials, because I think it is important. It is vital.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, with those videos, they do make a difference. Unfortunately, in our society, you know, you go to Europe and those are commonplace. They'll show those videos all day long everywhere. But in the United States, nobody wants to look at it, right? Nobody wants to look at it because it's too hard. But it took me 17 years to show that video, you know, to be okay to stand up in front of everybody and see that video, because I know that in my mind every day and I live that. And that's what makes me every day want to get up, and so that somebody else doesn't have to see that, so that somebody else doesn't have to do that. And that's it. That's those organic messages. There's so many out there. We just have to find a way to utilize them to keep them in people's spaces.
But we will do it because we have to. Thank you for the question, sir, and thank you for your service in law enforcement. I have learned a lot today, many things I'm going to take away, including I need to apparently go home and get on TikTok. So I will. I'll jump right on that. Can I get a round of applause for this great panel?